Okay, we'll do a few guided practice for sum and difference of sine. All right, first problem. Find the exact value of sine 285 degrees. So we have to find two numbers that we can either add or subtract to give us 285 degrees. Well, the strategy is if it ends in 5, that means guaranteed 45 is one of the numbers. So if I take my calculator and I simply do 285 minus 45, it lets me know there's the other number. So 45 and 240 add to be 285. So these are the numbers I'm using, 240 and 45. So 240 plus 45 is my 285. So my new problem, instead of sine 285, it's now sine the sum of 240 and 45, which means we'll be using the sum identity for sine. So sine A plus B. There's the AB, and for sine, my signs are the same. So in this problem, A is going to be 240, and B is going to be 45 degrees. Substitute everything in. There's my sine 240, cosine 45. There's the B, there's the A. So I'm going to be using sine and cosine of the numbers 240 and 45. So let's see what numbers we're working with. There's 45, so nothing but radical 2's over 2's. And 240, we're using negative radical 3 over 2 for sine and negative 1/2 for cosine. So those are the numbers we'll be applying. So let's see what we got. There's the 240, negative radical 3 over 2, cosine 45, radical 2 over 2, sine 45, radical 2 over 2, and 240, negative 1/2. So let's just simplify. If we multiply this together, negative radical 6 over 4, and here we get negative radical 2 over 4. There's a negative radical 6, negative radical 2. There's our answer. Negative radical 6 minus radical 2 all over 4. Let's see what the next problem is. Find the exact value of sine negative 15. Again, I can go to my calculator and use 45. So if I just did, say, what we got, negative 15, let's say, I don't know, plus 45. Let's see. There's 30. So recognize 45 and 30, the difference is 15. So that 30 minus the 45 will give us the negative 15. So using 45 as a base can assist us with finding the two numbers. All right, so there's our 30 minus 45. And again, it has to be in this order because 45 minus 30 won't give us negative 15. So it looks like we'll be using our new problem. Instead of sine negative 15, will be sine 30 minus 45. So we're using the difference of sine. So there's the difference. There's negative subtraction here, subtraction there. AB, sine B, cosine A. So in this problem, A is going to be 30 and B is going to be 45. So let's substitute. So that means the sine of 30 minus 45. So that's A 30, B 45, B 45, A 30. So we'll be using the sine and cosine of 30 and 45 degrees. So let's see what we got. There's 30 and 45. 30, 1/2 and radical 3 over 2. So 1/2 the sine, which we should already know. Cosine 30, radical 3 over 2. And 45 is always the radical 2's over 2. So those are the numbers we'll be using. So sine 30, there's the 1/2. Cosine 45, radical 2 over 2. Sine 45, radical 2 over 2. And cosine 30, radical 3 over 2. Let's simplify. This will give us radical 2 over 4. And this will give us radical 6 over 4. So there's our answer. Radical 2 minus radical 6 all over 4. All right. Let's use radians now. Find the exact value of sine 19 pi over 4. Well, previously, we used 45 as our base. So in this case, because we're using radians, we're using 3 pi over 12. So that's what we're playing with here. So 19, take away the 3, gives us 16. So if we look back, 16, yes, 16 pi over 12 is one of our base numbers. So we'll be using 3 pi over 12 and 16 pi over 12. So 19 pi over 12 is the same thing as 3 pi over 12 plus the 16. So that means we can rewrite the problem from 19 pi over 12. Oops, sorry. We're using the sum formula. My bad. And in this case, A is going to be 3 pi over 12, and B is going to be 16 pi over 12. So here's how I showed it. The 3 pi over 12 is 16 pi over 12. The 3 pi over 12 reduces to the pi over 4. 16 pi over 12 reduces to the 4 pi over 3. So these are the numbers. Really don't make a difference if you're going to use the 3 and the 16 or the 1 pi and the 4 pi. Your values are still going to be the exact same. So in this case, the 19 pi over 12, that simplifies to the 3 pi over 12 plus the 16 pi over 12. But 3 pi over 12 and 16 pi over 12 is the pi over 4 and the 4 pi over 3. All I did was reduce. So these are the values we'll be looking at. Pi over 4, 4 pi over 3. So in this case, when we expand it out, there's the pi over 4. There's the 4 pi over 3. Because we're still using sine, there's the A, there's the B. So we'll be using the values of sine and cosine for pi over 4 and 4 pi over 3. So let's see. Pi over 4 and 4 pi over 3, which is over here. Pi over 4, so we're using again the radical 2's over 2 and the 4 pi over 3. All the 16 pi over 12, whichever one you use, we're still going to be using the negative radical 3 over 2 and the negative 1/2. So here we go. So there's the radical 2 over 2's and the other numbers we articulated. Sine pi over 4, there's the radical 2 over 2. There's the negative 1/2. Sine of 4 pi over 3, the negative radical 3 over 2, and the radical 2 over 2. Let's simplify. That'll give us negative radical 2 over 2, and that'll give us negative radical 6 over 2. There's our answer. We simplify this out. There's negative radical 2 minus radical 6 all over 4. Let's do one more. Sine negative 5 pi over 12. Again, I can deal with the 3. If I put 3 here, that looks like either going to be some sort of 2 or 8. Well, 2 and 3 add up to be 5, not a negative 5, but the 8. So if we did, shouldn't have to do this in the calculator, but I'll illustrate. So we said, so if I did, there's the 5 minus 3 gives us 2. 2 plus 3 gives us positive 5. That's not what we're looking for. But 3, what is it, 5 plus 3? There's the 8. 8 minus 3 is 5. 3 minus 8 will give us the negative 5. So again, each time I'm either going to add or subtract by 45 or add or subtract by 3. So 3 pi over 12 minus 8 pi over 12 will give us a negative 5 pi over 12. So in this case, we're still using subtraction. So there's the formula we'll be using. And again, the A will be the pi over 4, which is the same thing as the 3 pi over 12. There's our 8 pi over 12, simplified to 2 pi over 3. So when I put this out, negative 5 pi over 12, we wrote it as a difference. But the 3 pi over 12 can simplify to pi over 4, and the 8 pi over 12 can simplify to 2 pi over 3. So whether you use these values or these values, you're still going to get the exact same answer. So when I expand it out, sine pi over 4, cosine 2 pi over 3. Sine 2 pi over 3, cosine pi over 4. So we're looking for the values for sine and cosine for pi over 4, which we should know by now. That's our radical 2's over 2's. The 2 pi over 3. So that's the one we need to confirm on. 2 pi over 3, right here, 2 pi over 3. So we're working with a radical 3 over 2 and a negative 1/2. So let's see what we get. When we substitute the values in, there's the radical 2 over 2. There's the negative 1/2. There's the radical 3 over 2. And then followed by the radical 2 over 2. Simplify, that'll give us negative radical 2. And right here, this will give us negative radical 6. There's our answer, negative radical 2 minus radical 6 all over 4. All right.